All right, welcome to episode 2 of our podcast. I'm Zach.
And I'm Sam.
And today is going to be the follow-up to our first podcast in which we discussed how we would go about writing Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker.
So, our first podcast, for those of you who saw it, was a couple weeks before Episode 9 came out. The prompt was, having Episode 8 having already come out, how would you write Episode 9? And now, of course, we've both seen Episode 9. Of course, we could talk about that for hours and hours and hours. Ultimately, still the prompt is very similar. I guess we'll start with like a basic overview of our thoughts on Episode 9, and then kind of quickly get into what we would have done differently. So yeah, I think you can go ahead and take it off.
Boy.
So where to begin, right? It's like, what do you begin with?
Okay, so if you listen to the last podcast, I mean, you kind of already, could guess that, where our feelings were going to be about this movie. And I will say, having put my expectations so low for the movie, and I actually kind of spoiled some of it for myself. I did go online, right, and I read some spoilers. I read some things. And ironically, that actually helped me enjoy the movie a little more.
That's interesting. Since
I knew like the spoilers, I knew I was going to hate certain moments.
Right.
It was actually kind of freed me up to enjoy the movie a little more.
Sure. Yeah.
That being said, it wasn't all bad. There were definitely
not all bad
moments that I enjoyed. But overall, I just felt like it was a cobbled together mess.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That was trying to put a cap on a trilogy that I think it just got off on the wrong foot from the very beginning.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that's kind of my main diagnosis of this whole trilogy is just it got off on the wrong foot from the very beginning, and there's no fixing that,
Right.
And I think Abrams did what he could.
Writing prompt.
He did what he could to salvage it, and then you had the twist of The Last Jedi that he had to try and reverse.
The gotcha of The Last Jedi.
But yeah, those are my overall takeaways. Is like it was a fun adventure movie. There were definitely like really great moments about it that reminded you why we loved Star Wars.
Yeah.
Great action scenes. It moved along very quickly, almost too quickly. But overall, it didn't satisfy my desire for what a new Star Wars trilogy after so many years would look like.
Right. So I feel mostly the same way. I guess my super quick summary of how I feel about the whole trilogy is like, Episode 7, I think, was a pretty strong movie, had some strong new characters, but of course it was way too similar overall to Episodes 4 and 6, but especially to Episode 4.
Way too similar. Yeah.
Jakku was basically Tatooine.
Yep.
Kylo Ren and all that, I think his characterization is fairly different from Darth Vader, but he's very Darth Vader-ish, of course. Rey is basically Luke Skywalker. Starkiller Base is basically the Death Star, and so on. So either way, though, you still could have taken the foundation of Episode 7 and made a terrific rest of the trilogy. And of course, I haven't spent hours upon hours researching the behind-the-scenes corporate stuff, but I think we both agree also that there is a ton of corporate meddling with the new Star Wars trilogy, right? And so you especially see that in Episode 9. Overwrought, overthinking of the story, lots of back and forths. There's a whole, release the JJ cut sort of part of this discussion that we'll get into in a little bit. But anyway, so that brings me to Episode 7. I think with Episode 7, it seems to me like they decided to take it in a pretty bold direction by taking Rian Johnson, who, my God, that guy directed a ton of Breaking Bad episodes, including Ozymandias, which is one of the best dramatic episodes of television ever. And he's directed Looper. He was this promising up-and-coming filmmaker, so they decided to let him write and direct it. And I think, like we talked about in the last podcast, I think The Last Jedi has way too many gotcha moments just for the sake of gotcha moments. It ran counter to a ton of the foundational Star Wars principles and ideas, and it just felt like artificially twisty and turny. And then Episode 9. So you have the first movie is too safe and similar to what's already happened. The second movie of the trilogy is too bonkers and different. The third movie is just this like almost chimeric hodgepodge of like last minute, oh, Darth Sidious is alive again, or Palpatine. Oh, Lando Calrissian's now in the story, finally. So Episode 9 is just this corporate, like, jigsaw puzzle, like sloppily assembled of story. But like Zach said, I do think it had some really strong moments. I think Ben Solo, Kylo Ren's arc was pretty solid. Like, he made some good turnarounds. I think he did a pretty good job of that.
He was actually, for me, coming away from this trilogy, the most compelling character, more so than Rey.
Sure.
I like Rey as a person. I think she had a lot of potential. I love the female protagonist take, but her character just did not have enough flaws.
Sure.
And she did not have enough to grapple with other than who are my parents. Mm-hmm. And that is that's just not a strong enough obstacle to overcome as a character. It's like, who are my parents? Who cares? It's like, and maybe that was the whole crux of this new trilogy, is trying to do away with the Skywalker saga, that it doesn't really matter. And I think the ending kind of gave that away, of just like, in the end, actually, it doesn't matter if you're bloodline Skywalker. It's whatever you feel like,
right. Yeah, that's right. She decides, I'm not a Palpatine, I'm a Skywalker.
Yeah, it's like, okay, so what? But but still, like, as a character, she just did not have enough to have to overcome. Like, what is her main dilemma? What is her obstacle? Mm-hmm. And so, and I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but that final moment, her final challenge and confrontation with Palpatine to strike her down, it just didn't feel weighty to me, because it's like,
it was just thrown together.
Like, that's not a choice. Like, that's not a temptation. Like, that's not something that we've seen her struggle with for the consecutive 3 movies.
It's like, if you want to go like the villain can corrupt the hero, right? Like, that can be a very compelling story element, and I think it was done masterfully in The Dark Knight, the Batman movie. The Joker really brings Batman close to being just a straight up villain, and like, he gets into the Batman's head. So well done. Palpatine,
because they're so similar, which is, we can talk about The Dark Knight sometime.
Yeah, that could be another episode.
Oh, man. Episode.
Oh, yeah, just us gushing over it. It's so amazing. Anyway, but yeah, like they tried to very quickly throw that element into the story here, but really, like Zach said, I agree that Rey's pretty much a flawless, overpowered character. She struggles with who her parents are, but that doesn't really feel like that much of a struggle.
Right.
And for the most part, it's just like, oh, darn, I didn't kill the bad guys this time. Hopefully I'll kill them next movie.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not a real obstacle.
Right.
And so when there's that final confrontation between Palpatine and Rey, I mean, she's torn up about, oh my gosh, I'm your granddaughter. That's crazy. But ultimately, it's just like, just kill the dude. I mean, like, what is that? That doesn't take away from Rey. That doesn't make her now the villain or anything. So that definitely felt. I mean, I think it's obvious. Well, I say that. I feel 90% confident that from the beginning of the trilogy's conception, they weren't planning on having Palpatine come back and be like the main villain. It really feels like after Episode 8, oh, Palpatine's back. That's what we'll do. Like, it really feels like that's the choice they made. And maybe not. Maybe that was the plan all along.
It was.
But even, here's the thing, though. Even if that was the plan all along, they executed it poorly, because it sure as hell felt like they just decided to throw him back into the mix in Episode 9, And regardless of whether it was intentional, it felt that way.
Reintroducing Palpatine in the opening crawl, rather than having a scene where it's like they first, it's described in the opening crawl that a mysterious signal is sent across the universe with Palpatine's voice, and then it's like, show me, don't just, that is the biggest moment. Like, that is the biggest turning point in this whole Star Wars trilogy.
As
is like that Emperor Palpatine is back, and you just pellet in
It's
the
just an
opening
info
crawl.
dump, classic info dump,
It's
right?
like I
Yeah.
want to see that scene. That's a powerful scene, you know. And it's like, no, here it is in the opening
Yeah.
crawl,
And I mean,
you know,
this
blink
is-
and you missed it, and you're like, what?
So I think this would kind of defy Star Wars tradition in kind of a cool way. Imagine that as like a cold open. Imagine like the movie opens, like Lucasfilm logo fades into black, and then boom, we see that, and then bum, ba ba bum, ba ba ba, and then the words come in. Like, because think about how, because the Star Wars open is so iconic. Like
So iconic,
having like a cold open and then that comes in, that would have been so cool.
And
But-
I think fans would have been open to something different.
Oh yeah,
You know.
yeah. So
But,
anyway,
but back to Kylo Ren being for me, after I saw the movie, I was like, you know, he was more of a main character than Rey was, in my opinion. I feel like this was actually more his story. At least his story was more compelling with the choices that he was forced to make,
right.
with his resolution, his coming back around, his sacrifice.
He may not have had as much screen time as Rey, but he definitely had like character development and character change and like stakes to his personality and all
Yeah,
that. So
and Adam Driver just absolutely killed it. I mean, he's a phenomenal actor.
yeah, he's a good actor for sure. Yeah. So the movie begins with Kylo going to Exegol, where Palpatine is hiding, and I believe that's because Palpatine like spoke with Kylo telepathically, right? Sort of just like directly. Isn't that how he knew where Palpatine was?
It's
think that's how.
so it has to do with the Wayfinder. And actually, the movie opens with Kylo Ren on Mustafar, which was Vader's planet.
Sort of
you know, where
birthplace in a
where
way.
his castle was, and there's a Wayfinder.
Wait, so Vader had a castle on Mustafar?
Yes, well, we saw that in Rogue One. Remember that was his castle, Vader's castle in Rogue One.
I do not remember Vader's castle.
Yeah. So that was,
What?
I mean, his kind of his palace or his whatever it is.
I don't remember them going to Mustafar, the lava planet.
Yeah, Mustafar. So in Rogue One, the general visits Darth Vader on Mustafar, and apparently it's his castle that was built over the lava flows, and it's supposed to be a place of dark Sith energy, and you know, obviously kind of the birthplace of Darth Vader, and so anyways, somehow or another, Kylo Ren finds out that there's a Wayfinder on Mustafar, which has its own whole backstory, because you see that vegetation is starting to grow back on Mustafar, which has its own, you know.
How?
The only way I know this is because I've had to do my own research. None of this is alluded to in the movie itself. This is all kind of extra material. So the average viewer would not know this. But apparently, some sort of long-held, powerful Sith bond that kept the planet in a constant state of destruction and lava has been broken after all these years, and vegetation finally started growing back. Anyways, that's kind of the forest scene that you have with Kylo Ren killing those people.
So
Yes,
that
yes.
forest was Mustafar.
That forest was Mustafar. Yes. Again,
Okay.
most people would not know this.
News to me. Okay.
And the Wayfinder is one of two devices that I guess Palpatine planted there, or Darth Vader kept for Palpatine, that held the coordinates and the navigation to the outer regions, the Sith planet of Exegol, which is where somehow Palpatine, again, that's not really answered, was able to escape to after apparently not dying. And it's not a clone of Palpatine. This actually is Palpatine, so somehow he opened up a wormhole or something when he was cast down the bottomless pit.
Yeah, I guess theoretically, I mean, there's a lot of like unexplained magic in Star Wars, and that's fine.
Which is
to a certain
fine, you know,
extent.
yeah.
But I think like, you know, we definitely see in Episode 6, Palpatine falls down that iconic, gigantic, you know, spaceship shaft thing. Boom, huge explosion of light. Theoretically, I guess he could have just like, that explosion just like kind of like reverts back into him somewhere else. Who knows? But at the very least,
Well, he's a very powerful Sith, and so
Sure, yeah.
so it's not, and we've seen plenty of once dead Star Wars characters come back, like Darth Maul was brought back.
yeah, and that was also very abrupt and artificial. Because I swear, so Zach and I have talked about this. I mean, I thought Solo was a solid movie. It definitely could have been better. But I almost feel like there's some sort of artificial lightsaber requirement in every Star Wars movie.
Yeah.
And it almost feels like, because it's like at the very end of Solo, like there's a telegraph, or telegram,
Here's a
telepathic
hologram
communication, hologram
of Darth Maul.
and then he turns on his lightsaber and
grabs
says
his
something
lightsaber.
dark and intense. It's like, oh, there's your lightsaber.
Yeah, that the only reason for that was so that they could have a lightsaber in a Star Wars
Yeah,
movie. It
that's
wouldn't be
what
complete without a lightsaber.
Right.
Or with some sort of Sith Lord pulling the strings behind the evil. But yeah, all that being said, again, the average viewer would not know these things. You had to kind of dig up the information on this. But so I let's talk about Palpatine coming back. I mean, that's obviously kind of the biggest thing in this movie is Palpatine coming back as the main villain. And I'm not entirely opposed to it per se. It just
Sure.
did not feel
It has to be done right. It was done
predicated
abruptly.
rightly. It just did not feel
Yeah.
like the groundwork had been laid for it. It did feel like Abrams, after The Last Jedi, hopped onto YouTube, watched the top 10 conspiracy videos of, fan favorite videos of who Rey's parents could be, and basically picked Palpatine out of the list of like, okay, she could be a Skywalker, she could be Obi-Wan's granddaughter, she could be a secret, Darth Vader or whatever, or Luke or Leia, whatever, Palpatine. Oh, Palpatine, It just felt like, because literally I remember watching videos even after the first movie, The Force Awakens.
Yeah.
Someone, a lot of fans actually, that was one of the theories they threw out, that Rey was Palpatine's daughter and or granddaughter. And first of all, the optics for that is just terrible. I don't want to think about Palpatine having a granddaughter. But literally, it's like the best you can come up with is a fan theory. Like literally, this is something that people on YouTube came
Sure,
up with.
and it's like, again, theoretically, they could have been very intentional with Palpatine being the villain behind Snoke, because Snoke was always just a cheesy, like, basically Palpatine. He was a mwahaha kind of villain. So I mean, Palpatine actually has like a backstory, and even though he's also a pretty two-dimensional villain when you think about it, he's all about just like, dictatorship, controlling the galaxy at all costs kind of stuff. But at least Palpatine has a backstory, right? So if they just started from the beginning, Palpatine is the villain in episode 7 and 8, that would have been more compelling than this random mwahaha purple dude, soft Thanos or whatever you want to call him. So he had a nice bathrobe though. He did have a nice outfit, I guess.
Yeah, and
But yeah, so anyway, I think like they could have done it better. I think ultimately though, not explaining it and having it abruptly in the ninth episode is where it really feels like incredibly artificial. Like I think even a lot of like 10-year-olds, 13-year-olds watching the movie in theaters, they've never seen the other Star Wars movies. Even they would be like, wait, what? Like, huh? Who's this? I mean, okay, granted, again, you do have that vision that we talked about in the last episode. In episode 7, that Rey has that incredible vision. And also, a lot of that doesn't turn out to be true.
which
Doesn't happen.
absolutely connects to nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, they built it up as if this was going to connect
As if
to
it was
something.
prophetic, right?
And
yeah.
it's like,
But theoretically, so this vision basically ends with, these are your first steps. And supposedly that was, Ewan McGregor, right? He was brought in to record that, right? And so unless I'm misremembering, does Palpatine play any role in that vision? I don't know if he does.
I mean, it's totally unanswered. You know?
So, and even then, like, they could have kind of planted the seed for this twist there. But nope, they didn't. Because again, I think it's like almost definite that they hadn't thought of using Palpatine until the 9th movie.
The other thing too is that was unanswered when you start thinking about it is like, supposedly there's this force connection between Kylo Ren and Rey. And then it's revealed Snoke was the one behind connecting them.
Right.
And then it's revealed behind Snoke was Palpatine. So you have like a proxy behind a proxy,
which
connecting
can work.
Them both.
I mean, that can work in the sense that, like, okay, Palpatine just wanted this manipulatable, angsty teenager to bring his granddaughter to him. So I guess that makes sense. But okay, so ultimately though, here's what happens. So Kylo Ren meets up with Emperor Palpatine. Palpatine basically tells him, "I'm the one behind Snoke," that kind of stuff. I command you to go kill Rey. And see, maybe my memory is hazy here. How does Kylo react to this? He's like skeptical, because I think Kylo does plot to, like, overthrow Palpatine and still become the ruler of the First Order. But I think, tentatively, Kylo Ren accepts this mission, right, to go find Rey and kill her. And so that's what starts out the movie. And then we cut over to, let's see, what is that planet called again? Wherever the Resistance is headquartered, Rey is training.
Javin 2.
Yeah. Well,
it's Javin 2.0. I mean, it's this jungle planet.
Rey is training under Leia Organa and with the Resistance. So also, this is also a wrench that no one could have avoided, like just the fact that, unfortunately, Carrie Fisher died in December of 2016.
Yeah.
Like, that definitely complicated everything on top of it being a mess already.
I do think that threw a huge wrench in the story.
Yeah, because we've heard and read things that suggest that Episode 9 was going to very prominently feature Leia. But even then, though, like, you could theoretically do that in Episode 9. Suppose Carrie Fisher never died or hadn't died yet. But even then, if she was going to be like a major figure in Episode 9, they could have had her more important in Episode 8 when she was alive, right? Her presence in Episode 8 isn't particularly important. In fact, it's that Holdo, pink-haired lady, Laura Dern,
right?
Like, she's kind of like the most important, like, general of Episode 8. And there's that conflict with Poe, and she secretly has this plan, but of course she doesn't tell Poe, which she could just easily tell Poe, but
right.
That's not very suspenseful. But yeah. It's a plot hole. But that's a whole other thing. Yeah, so like, even if they were going to have Leia be a major character in Episode 9, they could have built that up more in Episode 8. But instead, she just Mary Poppins is back into the ship impossibly, and then takes a pretty sideline role in Episode 8. So
yeah,
it's strange.
Overall, the original trilogy actors were just kind of sidelined, which, I get handing the baton over to the next generation, but it just kind of makes you feel sad.
Yeah,
overall.
Especially for Carrie.
It's like,
and for all of them, really.
They brought them back.
But, yeah,
made them drop 30 pounds and get back into shape for this.
Yeah, it's just disappointing. Yeah,
they're just kind of like cameos,
right? And I feel the same way. Like I'm all about it not being all about the older actors. I think passing the torch is a good thing, and Luke, I would say, is pretty important. But Leia and Han are not that important to the story. I do think one of the best scenes in the whole trilogy is when Kylo kills Han Solo. Like, I thought that scene was emotional. It was pretty shocking. And I love just the way he sort of like caresses his son's face and then falls away. And like, I think that was powerful. That was good stuff. But other than that, Han is just like good old pirate Han Solo. And then Leia is, they were just sidelined. And they didn't have to be main characters, but they could have been more important to the plot at least. And but that did not happen. So,
yeah.
Well, okay. So basically, Finn and Poe come back to the Resistance, and they have intel that Palpatine's alive and he's on Exegol, right? And so, and also, let's see what happens next. Rey learns from Luke Skywalker's notes that a Sith Wayfinder could lead them to Exegol, right? So also, that's a very untapped and unanswered question. Is how did Luke Skywalker know about Palpatine, and why didn't he tell other people? I think for the most part, it's because, again, the creative forces behind this movie hadn't decided on that storyline until Episode 9 came around. But this can lead us into how would you write it differently. So I can say there's so much to talk about in how I would have written Episode 9 differently. And of course, a lot of that goes back to how I would have written episode 7 differently and how I would have written episode 8 differently.
Yeah.
Ultimately, to make it quick, Luke and his research and what he's doing with like trying to train these new Jedi, this new Jedi Order that falls apart, that could have been much more important in both the former 2 episodes. And I think especially in episode 8, when you finally have Rey training with Luke, you can have the cynicism, which again, we've talked about how that's a bit of a 180 from Luke's very standard golden retriever character. You can keep cynical, grumpy Luke, but at least let him be more informative. Mm-hmm. He doesn't really reveal that much new information. He's just like, I saw the darkness in Kylo. Mm-hmm. I was about to kill him, and then he resisted, and then he freaked out and became a bad guy. That's all you really learn from Luke. Otherwise, he's just like milking that creature and drinking its green milk. And that's also one of the best moments in the Star Wars trilogy, without a doubt. But
we really needed to know where that.
We really needed to see that.
I was wondering that.
So ultimately, that's one of the changes I would have made to episodes 8 and 9 is have Luke inform the viewer and Rey and anyone else more about what's been going on in the 30-year gap. It's about 30 years, right, between 6 and 7, whatever that gap is. Have Luke is a great vehicle with which you can talk about what's been happening. How did the First Order come up? How did Palpatine come back? Why did the Jedi Order fail in more detail? All of these amazing like story elements and foundational elements to the trilogy could have been revealed and built from Luke on Ahch-To. Is that how you say it? Ahch-To.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I would have done differently. I would have had a lot more lore and information come from Luke.
Yeah, I was looking, I was doing a lot of reading and watching videos between The Force Awakens and Last Jedi, and there was a lot of talk about kind of the gray Jedi and the Book of the Wills, which was something that George Lucas actually invented and talked about, and I was really excited because it seemed like The Last Jedi was going to get into that kind of a little more of the lore of the first Jedis, the primal Jedi.
Like the order, like the history of the Jedi Order itself.
Exactly, and so I was excited to find out more about that, and you don't really. I mean, it's just kind of, there's this tree, there's these scrolls, but you don't get into more of it, and it doesn't connect. That was one of the theories that I had, was I was hoping that somehow Snoke was actually the primal Jedi, and that somehow he would connect back to that, and things would come full circle, because he's never explicitly referred to as a Sith. He's not Darth Snoke, which I always thought was interesting. I thought that was intentional and there was something there, or at least they seemed to make it appear so. Now comes to find out it's absolutely nothing. It's all meaningless. There is no backstory. It was just Palpatine all along, which was extremely disappointing to me. And going off of what Sam said, I think, rewriting episode 9, I think you have to go back to episode 7, because this was my biggest disappointment, even from seeing the first trailer with The Force Awakens. I was really excited. It looked really good. But as soon as I saw that shot with the Millennium Falcon in the Tatooine-looking planet that we now know as Jakku, with a TIE fighter firing on it, I was just like, wait, what?
Nothing's
There's
changed.
TIE fighters back?
They just recycled
where did these
stuff.
come from? And that it turns out exactly to be what I feared, was that the First Order is just the Empire 2.0. They even have the same ships, the same, TIE fighters, just look a little bit differently.
Stormtroopers look pretty similar.
Yeah, exactly. Stormtroopers, clone troopers, whatever they are now, same outfits. You have, the Republic is taken out within the first, part of The Force Awakens, and so now it's set up again to a small group of resistance fighters fighting an evil empire. It's the exact same storyline. It's the exact same setup as the first trilogy.
And the interesting thing is, I think a lot of this, again, comes back to corporate meddling, right? Disney, this being overwrought, overproduced, too many, bigwig financiers who had no business making creative decisions. And that's happened throughout cinematic history. But it's I think there's the capitalistic aspect of Disney, right? Because a lot of this is capitalism. It's like, this is a huge financial asset. We need to play it as safe as possible. That's what they decided, at least, and do whatever we can to ensure we make a ton of money. And I'm no financial expert when it comes to the ins and outs of filmmaking, but I would say that if you're making a new Star Wars movie for the first time in 10 years, it's a guaranteed hundreds of millions of dollars return. Like, they could have taken risks, and they should have known that they could have taken, like, and honestly, what we're talking about wouldn't even be that radical, right? Like, taking a huge risk would be like, gosh, I don't even know. Like there are no lightsabers in the new Star Wars trilogy. Like they could have done crazy stuff and it might not have flopped, blown up in their faces. But the stuff we're talking about isn't even that like radical or wild or risky for them to have done. They could have done these things and still they could have known, like almost a guarantee, they're going to make hundreds of millions, if not $1 billion on the movie. But for some reason, these bigwigs at Disney, they're like, oh, no, we've got to use the Millennium Falcon. We've got to use TIE fighters. We've got to have the First Order basically be the Empire. Like, we've got to do all this stuff. Otherwise, it might not be a success. Like, how could they have thought that? It's a Star Wars movie. Come on. That's like the definition of a blockbuster.
Yeah. I mean,
how does that happen?
There have been so many stories written in the Star Wars universe. They could have pulled material from any number of books. Oh, yeah. Introduce any number of new villains, new dynamics.
And I can understand to a certain extent them wanting it to be an original story. Because again, I haven't read a ton of the Star Wars books. I know there's a lot of amazing Star Wars novel material out there. Like, I can kind of understand where they were coming from and not wanting anyone out there, theoretically, to know what was going to happen. But even then, they could have like nodded to it. They could have drawn from it a little bit. Yeah, and like you were talking about, they could have introduced new dynamics, like new villains, new characters, and they didn't do much of that at all. So, yeah.
Yeah. So coming back to how we would have written Episode 9, I would not have brought Palpatine back. I would have loved to explore Snoke as actually the true villain.
Sure.
Make him smarter in that somehow he knew Kylo Ren was going to attempt that, and so maybe he did make a clone of himself or something. We've already seen that he is a clone. We saw the vat of the other Snokes in Palpatine. So that's not beyond possibility. But somehow I just thought, okay, Snoke is a Palpatine-esque character. But let's make him more interesting. Why is he not Darth Snoke? Okay, that's interesting. Why does he have a ring with a black stone? Why does he wear that golden robe? It's like,
yeah, dude, that Hugh Hefner robe.
Like, where does he come from? So I would have made him, connect back to, like I said, probably the primal Jedi. He's as old as time. Maybe he started the Jedi. I don't know. Make him into, force some sort of confrontation between him and Luke, and bring Luke back. Okay. I don't know, maybe not necessarily from the dead, but as a Force ghost, he can obviously still interact with the physical world because he raised the X-Wing from Ahch-To Island, so he could still fight with a lightsaber and strike someone down. And that would be really interesting to see. We've never seen that before. A Force ghost do battle. But
sure, yeah.
I would have explored him as the main villain.
Totally.
Kylo Ren's character arc, I thought was predictable. I just knew he was going to come back around, but I thought it was good. I still think that was a good character arc. I did like kind of the all the different locations that they traveled to, and it's kind of like a almost a trope, but it still works, is kind of going and hunting for the MacGyver, it's just this wayfinder, and it sends them on a quest to go and look for all these good places, all these places. It's
lots of travel.
It's good. It's good
works,
storytelling.
I think.
It works. But at some point, it got so complicated that I know at a couple points I got lost as to like what are they looking for again, and then they just they fall into that snake pit and they just happen to stumble upon the very thing that they were looking for, this dagger, and the dagger takes them to the old Death Star, and the Death Star It has the other Wayfinder that they turns out that they didn't need after all because Kylo Ren crushes it and he has one in his ship. So it's like it did feel a little bit like we're jumping around a lot.
Yeah,
but then we
and the
ended
funny
up
thing
coming
is,
back full circle, and none of those things actually needed to happen.
Right. Well, yeah, I wonder if there's a term for that for storytelling. Like where like, yeah, there are all these pieces, like this leads to that, this leads them to there, but they didn't need this, but they actually go here. It's like, you don't even have to understand all of that because ultimately they still just go from A to B.
Right.
You know? And I wonder if there's a writing term for that, like in storytelling. I'd be very interested in that because like, I think it's sort like those kinds of twists and turns, like, oh, Kylo crushed it, but oh, he has a Wayfinder that can take them. Those little twists and turns, they're sort of like cheap, quick thrills. And I'm not saying they're always a bad thing. They can be used really effectively in a story. But I wonder if there's a term.
I don't think it's bad storytelling.
There's a lot of that in this movie. But
it's
still,
just,
they go from wherever they are to Exegol.
You know, I like that kind of stories. They're exciting. They're fun. It's kind of the mystery, the hunt, the search for items. It's a mystery that's unfolding. I don't think it's bad, but it did feel all meaningless. It did kind of feel like, well, they didn't need to go on those trips anyways because they had it all along or something like that.
Sure.
And that's where it just kind of feels like you want every scene to count. You want every moment to have weight to it and to carry the plot further and for the characters to be faced with choices that's revealing their character. And throughout all of this, we see her starting to kind of find out, internally that she is Palpatine's granddaughter, when she has that moment with the ship where she accidentally lets loose some Force lightning, is a big revealing moment.
Also a bit abrupt.
Very well.
Sure, whatever.
And then it's like they kill Chewie, and you're left in this state of absolute. They kill Chewie for like, I don't know. It's like a minute or so until they show him again, but that's like the most awful minute of the whole movie when you think they actually killed Chewie.
Call me a sadistic Game of Thrones fan, but I say kill Chewie.
No,
like kill beloved, because again, like when beloved characters die, that's when I don't know. Again, Star Wars isn't known for this, and that's fine. But like when a beloved character dies, it adds like weight to the story. It adds like stakes. Like Han Solo dying, that's a big deal.
But all the other characters have died. It's like you have to kill. Chewie.
No, I love Chewie. Don't get me wrong, but I'm not against killing Chewie per se as a writer. And yeah, kind of going off of that.
Sam is sadistic.
Going off of that, it's like, in episode 7 or episode 8, they kind of very abruptly introduced Benicio del Toro's character. I love him as an actor. His character could have been a great element to this story too.
Could have been.
But he's talking about how
he never came back.
And he's also this sort of like capitalism behind the scenes, like, it's a bunch of big corporate interests that are financing both the Resistance and the First Order. They're the weapons manufacturers. He's talking about all that stuff in the Casino Planet. And it's like, okay, that would be a really interesting story element that Star Wars has never really done before. Like, oh yeah, there are just these like, there's a freaking corporate oligarchy controlling a lot of this conflict. They're just like the puppet masters behind it.
Well, they're playing both sides,
right?
And
it's like you could have done a lot with that too in the whole trilogy, or at least in episodes 8 and 9. But again, that's just mentioned. Like, ooh, here's an edgy, interesting idea. Maybe it's not all light versus dark, and then it just never brought back up again. It's one of those like kind of fedora moments of episode 8, and so it's like, yeah, that could have been a really good story element, but they just didn't do anything with it. And so that's another thing I would have done differently with the Star Wars trilogy is I would have, again, going back to Game of Thrones, like having, the whole light versus dark conflict. It's timeless, and a lot of Star Wars uses like timeless archetypal elements, and it works. That's not a problem, I think. But I think you could have had more than just light versus dark in this new trilogy. You could have had like 3 or 4 factions that are all flawed, but also likable to some extent, that are all in conflict with each other. Like that would have been really intense. But again, okay, so you keep the light versus dark element, that's fine, but you don't have to have it so on the nose as to have the First Order and the Death Star and like all that other stuff reincarnated. That's where it's just like, okay, I don't mind light versus dark, but make it a bit more different than the way you did it last time.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many more dynamics of conflict.
So now we can start talking about a very famous Reddit post from it was December, right? And maybe late November too.
Yeah, it was.
There were updates to it.
It came out right after the movie came out, and I'm sure you've heard about it. It's the post that supposedly got released the JJ cut trending on Twitter, which was pretty amazing. And basically, to kind of summarize the main points, it is an insider leak, and again, we don't know if this is true. It's off the internet, so you got to take everything with a grain of salt. But supposedly, it basically details kind of this plot of Disney corporate management took over the edit of The Rise of Skywalker.
And more than just the edit, like they reshot stuff.
Oh,
right?
Well, we know that. We know that they did completely reshoot the ending, about 80% of the ending. And in fact, they had brought back George Lucas to help rewrite the ending. And I guess Disney even ejected what George Lucas had done.
What?
And so apparently even the edit that was shown on the premiere, J.J. Abrams said was not the movie he thought he had made. So I guess they even made edits behind his back before the premiere and totally cut things out, reshot things without him even knowing or having control over it. Or maybe he didn't know, but his hands were tied essentially. And the big scandal about this is obviously that supposedly J.J. Abrams was promised total creative freedom, even more creative control than the first one. And well, we just know where that goes. We know how that went down. Is I think corporate
the opposite of
corporate
that.
Disney. It's just you get this committee that comes in and takes a look at your edit and decides we can't take any risks or whatever. And overall, it just kind of leads to what I felt was The Rise of Skywalker. It just felt like a movie that needed to check boxes. You walk away and it's like, okay, we've checked the action sequence box. We've checked, the romantic relationship box.
Yeah, it felt very obligatory.
With that kiss. And where did that come from? Well, it can't be a Star Wars movie without at least one kiss.
Yeah, Kylo and Rey.
I mean, and it's like, okay, we've checked the box of seeing Ewoks, or callbacks to the original trilogy. We've checked the box of, and it just felt like nothing had emotional weight to it. Nothing had its own originality to it. It just felt like, let's check all the boxes for what we want to see in a Star Wars blockbuster movie. And but anyways, we'll get back to the Reddit post because there's some pretty explosive stuff in here.
There's a lot to get into.
And I mean, it's just a big enchilada to take in. So we could start breaking this down a little bit. So back to talking about the JJ cut, which was trending on Twitter as a result of this anonymous Reddit post from a supposed insider who had worked on The Rise of Skywalker. It's just again one of those examples of corporate meddling, and Disney has had a really bad track record of that with the Star Wars movies. And I'm gonna name names. I do think the big name in all of this is Kathleen Kennedy, and look, I love her previous work. She's worked on a lot of great other movies. Indiana Jones, E.T. She's famously worked with Spielberg.
Oh, yeah.
With a lot
She's
of those
one of the most iconic producers maybe ever.
I mean, she has a great track record. But in this case, I really think she mishandled the entire franchise. I think she meddled too much. I think she didn't go with her first instincts, which was to allow more creative freedom to these kind of independent directors. Except
maybe for episode 8. Maybe that was too much.
Maybe that was too much.
Yeah.
But we've seen her do it with Solo, where she brought on Phil Lord and Chris Miller, and then
right.
they nearly completed shooting the entire movie, and then she fired them, and they reshot almost the whole movie.
Yeah, I think
which was just crazy.
Oh,
and then
yeah.
they go on to win an Oscar for Lego.
Well, I think that was
No,
when they
not-
went on
not-
to win an Oscar for Spider-Man Into the
Spider-Man.
Spider-Verse. Yeah,
But they did the
It's
Lego
like,
movie too.
screw you, Lucasfilm.
So
yeah,
but yeah, I mean, it's just like example after example after example with Star Wars. It's like first, Colin Trevorrow was gonna write and direct Episode 9, and then he was fired after his abysmal failure with the Book of Henry. So it's just kind of like this. I think it's a pattern. If it happens once, it's like okay. If it happens twice, it's like eh. If it happens 3 times, and it did with Rogue One too. They also brought in a scriptwriter with Rogue One. They made significant changes with that one.
really.
Yeah, which I think actually, I mean, I loved Rogue One.
Yeah,
so
and
I think
we
it
might
turned
have-
out okay.
We
Like,
might have mentioned this during the last podcast. I think we might agree that Rogue One is by far the best Star Wars movie since
I
the
think it's-
reboot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rogue One is a terrific movie, I
Rogue
think.
One is my
Yeah.
favorite
So good.
Disney Star Wars movie.
Yeah, it's
hands
so good.
down. Gareth Edwards, amazing job.
Mm.
But again, there were a lot of revisions even with that.
Interesting.
So, but that being said, it's happened now on every single Star Wars movie that Disney has made.
Yeah.
And I see a pattern, and it's not a good one. So, anyways,
Right. Yeah, so getting into the JJ cut, of course, this original post that we're referring to here, again, take it with a grain of salt. This could be debunked. This could be, it could be myth and speculation. It could be a combination of truth and fiction. But ultimately, this is like a bullet point list of like 30 entries on it. We don't have to go over the whole thing, but so okay, here, I can go ahead and describe the general one of the main conspiracy theories behind it. Now, I don't know about Zach. I don't necessarily believe it, but I can kind of believe it. So Bad Robot, J.J. Abrams' production company, supposedly some executives at DC Comics were looking at having J.J. Abrams come in and make a DC film or two. And when you look at J.J. Abrams' track record with Star Trek and kind of with the Disney Star Wars and with a number of other films, he's good at like rebooting series pretty successfully and just making like commercially successful blockbuster films. And I like J.J. Abrams. I have nothing against him personally. I hear he's a really nice guy. I think he's a talented director. I do think he's a bit of a Spielberg imitator. He's kind of like a younger Spielberg.
Oh, he's a self-admitted,
right. He's a
Spielberg
classic
fan.
like 70s, 80s blockbuster nostalgia in the modern world filmmaker, which again for Star Wars that can work actually quite well. But anyway, so apparently DC executives were considering hiring J.J. Abrams to make DC films, and of course DC being a competitor of Marvel, which is owned by Disney. There's a conspiracy theory that higher-ups at Disney were okay with risking Episode 9 turning out poorly if it meant it would muddy J.J. Abrams' reputation so that it would not help out DC. Now, I think that would be absurd. Like, I think even because it's crazy how powerful this mega conglomerated corporation of Disney is. Like, yeah, even if Star Wars Episode 9 was a box office bomb, they would still be making hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, if not $1 billion, the next year and the year after that and the year after that. I mean, even though Avengers Endgame has already happened and Star Wars 9 has already happened, I'm sure Disney will make $1 billion or at least close to $1 billion this year. I mean, they're such a massive corporation. So theoretically, they could bomb Episode 9 on purpose, but I don't know. Personally, I think that's a little far-fetched.
Yeah.
It's a little hard to believe for such a big title. But that's a conspiracy theory that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it has all to do with Abrams' company, Bad Robot, which was bidding on, with Warner Brothers to kind of revamp their DC the DC universe, and it's just, you know, I'm sure that there's some sort of smoke, you know, I'm sure that there's some sort of fire behind the smoke. I'm sure that there are, you know, there's politics going on, and companies bidding and trying to sabotage each other and damage each other, and you know, the big thing here would be that Disney would be willing to damage one of their own lucrative franchises in order to damage, you know, a rival studio, which is just, I wouldn't put it beyond Disney.
Right. I wouldn't put it beyond them either.
But it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
So, but that's in here. Basically, you know, some of the big things are that originally JJ wanted to make this into 2 movies. Disney backed down, or didn't like that idea, so he was content to keep it to 3 hours, which 2 movies, I will say, it does feel like it was 2 movies condensed into 1. I mean, it moved so quickly, and that would have been interesting to see what scenes had been cut. But on the other hand, maybe it would have just been a lot of fluff. That's unnecessary, and
that's the struggle. It's like, I think with the Hobbit trilogy, for example, you know,
that should have been 1 movie. I mean, 2 movies max.
Well, here's the thing. I think with the Hobbit trilogy, if it were 1 movie, it would have been super dense and super long. I think the Hobbit trilogy could have been 2 really strong
Should have been
movies.
2. That's what it originally was.
But that's an awkward number. Like,
yeah.
Blockbusters don't come out in 2s in the business world.
It's okay. What?
Yeah. But anyway, back to Star Wars. Like, yeah, it's interesting to think about how that movie could have been split. And of course, we see that with Twilight. They split their final installment into 2 films. Hunger Games did the same thing. Harry Potter did the same thing. So it would not have been unheard of at all for there to be like a part 1 and 2. But maybe because there's such a tried and true trilogy tradition, that's a lot of TRs. That's some good alliteration. Mm-hmm. Tried and true trilogy tradition with Star Wars, it's always been trilogies. I think because of that, there might have been that particularly hard pressure to not split into 2 movies. So here's one thing that I'll mention, which frustrated me so much during the Rise of Skywalker was you have scenes where Finn is constantly trying to tell Rey something. Oh yeah, that was such a exposed blooper of a loophole.
You never find out what it is that he's trying to tell her.
And that's mentioned in this, isn't it?
And it's finally mentioned here.
So for those that aren't familiar,
I'm just going to read
it. Finn, he's basically saying, Rey, I have something to tell you. There's something I need to tell you.
Yeah, multiple times.
It's like 2 or 3 times in the movie.
Yeah, 2 or 3 times he's wanting to tell her something, and it's kind of made a big deal out of. Mm-hmm. And then he never gets around to telling. We never find out what that is. And you don't realize it until you're driving home from the movie theater. You're just like,
wait, what was he going to tell her?
What was he going to tell her? Yeah. You know, it's like, that was never answered.
And supposedly their justification might be, he might have been about to say I love you, but then didn't. Maybe that's what they were relying on. But even then, that's just like, what?
Which is just out of nowhere. I mean,
yeah.
So anyways, I'll just read this right here. Finn wanting to tell Rey something was always meant to be Force sensitivity. In the 3-hour cut, it's explicitly stated. There was a moment when Janna and he were running on top of that Star Destroyer, and Finn needed to unlock or move something, and he force moved it and acted surprised when it happened. This was replaced with a CGI'd BB-8 fixing whatever he needed to fix on there. So I totally believe that, because there was a scene where he and Janna were talking, and it's like, you know, they both escaped the First Order, and they kind of realized, like, maybe it was the Force, you know, kind of calling us, you know, maybe it was that feeling was the Force. And so this being the original, you know, reason makes a lot of sense. And it's amazing to me that if they're going to cut out that scene, they still kept in all the scenes where he says, I got to tell you something.
Yeah. And
if you're going to cut that out, cut out all those scenes too.
And it might have been hard because they might not have had enough coverage to cut around it, you know, just editing wise. But, yeah, you would think, again, they could just reshoot those scenes if they were determined to cut that out. Which makes you think if they did cut that out like behind Abrams' back, which they may very well have done, they might have done that like a week before the premiere date or something. They might have done that like super last minute. At which point they were like, well, we can't reshoot that, so we just have to leave that in. Who knows? But I will say again, this whole release a JJ cut post, it could be partially fictional, it could be entirely untrue, but a lot of the points seem very specific and very believable. Like it could be made up, but some of the stuff that's mentioned, it's like, yep, that's very specific and very believable. So I don't know. There's so many things to talk about in this Reddit post. I think again one of the main things that stands out to me the most is this idea that Disney would literally promise J.J. Abrams something and then go back on their word on it. I guess executives do that sometimes, but they would do that a lot. And literally, it got to the point where they were making editing changes without him even knowing about it, without saying, "Hey, we're gonna cut the scene out. We're gonna adjust this dialogue." They would just do it, and then Abrams would find out about it later. And that's like, I cannot imagine that. I mean, J.J. Abrams is known for being a really nice guy, and he's known for like not being a yeller at all. But one of the bullet points in that list is that like at some point someone overheard J.J. Abrams in a meeting yelling, "Well, why don't we just say this is written and directed by Lucasfilm?" You know?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think
it's intense. It's crazy.
Now, it could be that this is a a fake leak or whatever designed to kind of clear Abrams' name. Maybe once he saw the reaction, he, someone or an Abrams fan, entirely made this up to kind of help him distance himself from the disaster. Because it definitely paints Abram in a sympathetic light to where he, it literally says here that he realized that, these movies are not made for the fans, they're made for the shareholders, the stockholders. And which is just, what a just sad statement. But I can totally see it. I can totally see Disney making a movie that will make them money and please shareholders rather than the fans, because they have so much invested in it. But I specifically wanted to talk about the ending. There's a lot of talk about the changes to the ending,
right? And
I personally, I was, very disappointed with the ending of The Rise of Skywalker. I feel like the movie, could have delivered a lot more. It still wouldn't have been great, but at least it could have tied things up a lot better. And from this Reddit post, it seems like what J.J. Abrams originally shot and what George Lucas helped write and shoot would have been a much better ending, but it seems that it was ultimately tossed. And so
so what is that? Remind me, what is the supposed like an original ending?
So originally we were going to have the Force ghosts of the Jedi appear in person and help Rey defeat Palpatine. Instead, so apparently they actually did all shoot that. Hayden Christensen was brought back.
Samuel
Jackson was brought back. They brought back a lot of the old actors. Ewan McGregor was brought back, and
Qui-Gon.
I think Qui-Gon was brought back, and apparently they cut all that and only kept the voices, which is what you hear when she's like laying on her back, and so you hear the voices of the Jedi, but you don't see them. And then somehow she's able to summon the second lightsaber, and somehow with two lightsabers she's able to defeat Palpatine rather than with one, which doesn't make any sense to me. But
I guess what my question for that would be, if they filmed that, unless these executives / maybe JJ didn't like it that much, like if they filmed that, which that sounds like a really cool ending, or at least an ending to the battle, why would they cut that out?
Right. Apparently, and again,
it's not how I would have written it per se myself, but
no, but
if they filmed it, why? I don't know.
Yeah,
because what they replaced it with was like, here's the thing. It's one thing to have that ending and maybe think, creatively, I'm not a huge fan of that ending, but it's another thing to have that ending and cut out 90% of it, but keep 10% of it. Because that's what they did, it sounds like. It's still a similar thing. The Force ghosts only through audio means give Rey this power and she defeats Palpatine. So it's still more or less the same writing, just less cool. You know? So that's really odd.
Yeah. And apparently she was also going to, apparently they actually also filmed this, was she went back to Tatooine and she actually started a Jedi temple on Tatooine. And you see some of the Force ghosts there on Tatooine with her, and you see her starting to train other people. And I do think they were going for a more, and she was using Leia's lightsaber and whatnot. So personally, you know,
I'm sorry, you finish first.
No,
That reminded me of something.
I kind of would have loved to have seen that. I think it would have been
that'd been cool.
A logical conclusion to, you know, where they were taking everything, and with Rey kind of being the last hope again. We've had a lot of last hopes, you know.
Yeah, lots of
Luke
last
was
hopes.
supposed to be the last hope, and then, you know, he grows to a cynical man, and now Rey's the last hope, and, you know, she'll probably grow into a cynical
30
woman.
years from now, or even maybe 3 years from now, knowing Disney's nonstop pace, maybe 3 years from now, they'll just get Daisy Ridley to be like an old woman who's like really grumpy on like an island.
She'll go back
planet.
to Octo.
Yeah.
And, but there was also something else that bothered me about the ending, and that was kind of Kylo Ren's unnecessary death. I always kind of felt that he was going to die. I just feel like the manner in which he died was a little weak. You know, it's like he kisses Rey and somehow is able to transfer life force to her or something and bring her back. And
it's out of nowhere.
It's just
a
kind
convenient magic fix.
Yeah, it's like
that sort of thing has not been established. And again, Star Wars has always pulled random magic out. Even the first 6 movies have, like with the midichlorian stuff, like, you know. But still, it's one of those things where it's like a cheap magic patch over like what you want to happen.
Yeah, it's like first he dies, and then, you know, Rey kills him, and then she heals him again, and then he dies to bring her back to life. And it's just like
too much back and forth.
It's just so much back and forth, and it's like, oh my gosh, like what?
And again, death means nothing when you know, like, oh, it's a good guy. They've got plot armor. They're going to be revived. You know, like again, you got to have stakes. You got to have
exactly
a well-loved character die every now and then. You got to have like, or even if it's a villain, like if they die, they should probably stay dead.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and so I have I thought of an ending, you know, not that would have fit the movie a lot better, and I think would have been a lot more powerful. And this is, you know, very much in keeping with, you know, I haven't changed the rest of the movie, so this is really just rewriting the very ending, but. This whole the whole final scene with Palpatine it's never very clear what are the stakes, right? Because he wants Rey to kill her. I mean, he that's what he tempts her with, right? Kill me, and then my soul will go on to live in you, and essentially all the you know the souls of the Sith that are there, the thousands of Sith that are there, will also indwell in her. Now I never quite understood how that works. I think it's like a Sith thing. Yeah. It's like if you kill the Sith, like they'll live in you, or their soul will pass into you.
See, I don't think that's a consistent thing in Star Wars lore or storytelling. I think it's really just, again, so, you know, in Episode 6, Luke has the option of killing Palpatine, Darth Sidious.
Right. Same temptation.
It's very, you know, it's very Christ-like. He chooses to, like, you know what, I'm going to be non-violent. I'm just going to lay down my lightsaber. I'm not going to commit violence. and that's kind of like Luke choosing good over his like deepest impulses.
Right.
That's the conflict, and I think that's actually a pretty compelling conflict. And I think they wanted to do something similar to that here, only they couldn't. Hadn't established Rey as this like super like paladin kind of like ultra good guy kind of character. She's a very good person, but she's not like Luke good, And
Right.
so I think because of that, they realized they couldn't do the exact same thing, and so they wanted there to be some sort of cognitive dissonance or some sort of hesitation over killing Palpatine. And so I think that's how they rammed that in there. But it was maybe a bit out of nowhere.
Yeah. So here's, should I share my proposed alternate ending?
Yeah.
So, okay. And I believe that this would make the Kylo Ren's sacrifice a lot more powerful. And in order to kind of understand this, you have to kind of understand in the Star Wars universe, if you're a Jedi, death is not really an end. And we don't really feel that bad when a Jedi dies because they can return as a Force ghost. And so death itself is not really, a tragic ending. And so the stakes are not that high. So we're going to focus on Kylo Ren for a second. Kylo Ren, he's committed a lot of heinous crimes, right? He's murdered a lot of people, innocent people. His journey back to the light side is a long and torturous one, but there obviously needs to be some sort of redeeming action for him to come back to the light side, and for, there has to be an act of redemption for him because he's just done so much bad, so much evil, and even though we really like him, he's a sympathetic guy. Like there's got to be something, right, for him to do. Keep the same setup with Palpatine, the same temptation, whoever, but make it, whoever strikes me down. Because here's the other thing, is that there was never really any big conflict with Palpatine. It's like, well, we just got to destroy him. We just got to kill him because he's a bad guy, right?
Yeah.
So I would have written it so that somehow with some Sith dark power, he's so powerful, he basically says, whoever strikes me down, my soul will pass into you. But if you don't strike me down, so they're kind of forced into a lose-lose situation. It's like, okay, if we don't kill him, he's obviously still alive. Palpatine survives. If we do kill him, whoever kills him, basically ensures that Palpatine still survives. And so now you're in this like really high stakes, like, what do we do? High conflict, lose-lose situation. What do you do? And so they can engage in battle with him, but it's kind of like, what's the point? We're not really we're trying to defeat him, but not really, because whoever kills him, his soul will pass into him. And so this is Kylo Ren's opportunity. Now, to raise the stakes even further, it has to be made clear somehow at some point that if you do, if you do kill Palpatine and he takes over your soul or whatever, his soul passes to you, like, there is no becoming a Force ghost. Mm-hmm. There is no joining the Force ghost realm. That essentially, maybe that's only reserved for Jedi. Maybe only Jedi who have ascended on the light side can be Force ghosts.
So you think Kylo should have, knowing he could not become a Force ghost if he did this, he should have been the one to kill Palpatine, absorb the evil in his soul, and then die. He's gone.
Right.
And that way
he knows that his sacrifice being...
He knows he gets no reward.
There's no reward, but he does the right thing,
Yeah.
and he destroys Palpatine. And that being something that Palpatine did not count on. Because being evil, everybody thinks,
That'd be good.
in their own self-interests too. And that's always the crux between evil and good, is that evil can't grasp good, darkness can't grasp light, and light being always acting not in self-interest, right? Being able to sacrifice itself. And so it totally blindsiding Palpatine, that option that he never considered.
Oh yeah.
So it would have just made Kylo Ren's story arc so much more powerful. It would have made his death so much more powerful. You know, it would have given us a true high stakes battle at the end with Palpatine, and then, and this is you know, this might be cheesy, take it or leave it, but I would have loved to see Rey go to Tatooine and construct a Jedi temple and be training, and maybe this is super cheesy, but we're at the end and we skip ahead like 8 years later, right? 8 years later, the temple is the Jedi training temple is flourishing. There's a lot of great trainees. You know, Rey is older. Maybe Finn is a Jedi now, you know, also training. And a woman shows up with a young boy to enter him into the Jedi training temple. And Rey meets him, and there's something familiar about him. And he's 8 years old, and she asks him, you know, what's your name? You know, and his name, he says Kylo. And only she knows in that moment that maybe this is Kylo Ren somehow, perhaps reincarnated or something, and coming back to the light side. But as a child.
I think if that were to happen,
So-
wouldn't that mean that's like the next Darth Sidious or whatever, if he has all the darkness absorbed into him, into his soul?
It could be.
Yeah.
But we've seen this. We've seen, you know, this theme of spontaneous generation or rebirth or whatever.
With Anakin.
We've seen that with Anakin, and so who knows? That might be too cheesy. Maybe you don't want to end it that way, but it would certainly be compelling, and maybe you don't. You know, you leave it ambiguous as to like maybe his name's not Kylo, but it's like, here's a dark-haired boy who looks very similar to Kylo Ren, who's 8 years old, you know, same age as when Kylo died. You know, it would be ambiguous, but that's kind of an ending that I thought of.
Yeah, it's
a
interesting.
plausible alternate ending.
Yeah, I definitely like the idea that, like, the idea of Kylo doing the right thing and taking and killing Palpatine and taking all of that into his soul, knowing he wouldn't be rewarded for it.
Right.
Because in a way, that really is the ultimate sacrifice. I mean,
Yeah.
even when people do good in this world, a lot of the time, there might still be some slight reward, like just knowing that, like, you might be admired for it, or just knowing that you might feel good about it yourself, even, which is pretty reasonable, that last one. But yeah, I mean, again, sacrificing yourself to do the right thing is a pretty big deal. So yeah, I think that would have been a really strong ending for Kylo, for sure.
Yeah.
I guess just looking at the ending here, one of the things I would have done, and again, I'd have to go back to the beginning of the trilogy for this to rewrite the whole thing, but ultimately, I might have had Finn actually sacrifice himself in Episode 8, like he was trying to.
Oh yeah.
And that's a whole other side tangent, the fact that Rose is like not really a character in this new movie. Apparently that was unintentional.
Apparently she did have more scenes, but they were cut out.
Yeah. But so what I would have done is I might have had Finn actually sacrifice himself in Episode 8, and it would have been a bigger deal than it would have been in Episode 8, because in Episode 8 it's like the scope of the whole series just shrink. Like, oh, the Resistance is just like a handful of ships now. You know what I mean? It felt like, you know, it just felt like everything was smaller scale in that sense. Like there's only 100 Resistance people left on these ships or whatever. It felt like everything shrank. But I would have not done that, and I would have had Finn sacrifice himself in a big and meaningful way that really sets back the First Order. Also, I don't think I would have had the First Order to begin with, so it's kind of hard to like say what I would have done. But okay, one thing I would have done though is if I hadn't had Finn sacrifice himself, I think I would have had Finn have to make like an intense choice, like a moral choice between like one or two close friends and like the greater good, or like anyone having to make that kind of a choice would have been really difficult. It doesn't feel clean. It doesn't feel like pristine and perfect. That would have, I think, been really interesting. And also, and stuff like that can reflect the complexities of reality, the geopolitical climate we live in. And I think like that kind of thing would be interesting. And I like that ending with Kylo. I really do. I think bringing Han Solo back for those like visions he had, it worked. It was solid, but it was just kind of like, I don't know. I feel like Han Solo's presence should be more special than that.
Yeah.
And for them just like throw him into a scene, it just felt kind of wrong.
Yeah.
Like I think if he's gonna have any screen time, it needs to be a momentous moment because he's such an iconic character. And also, it's hard to say how you would have written it because Carrie Fisher died, and so, which is terrible. I could totally see myself writing Leia as being more important. That said, again, that very abrupt retroactive writing of, Leia was a Jedi and she was, she had her own lightsaber that she gives to Rey. Like, I can totally get behind her secretly having her lightsaber and giving it to Rey, but you would think that would have happened like in episode 7 or in episode 8.
Yeah.
Like, why does it just now happen in episode 9? Is it only because Palpatine's back that she hands her lightsaber?
Right.
And like there's those flashback scenes with the CGI young Carrie Fisher doing Jedi training, which can kind of explain that ridiculous sequence in episode 8 where she's like in deep space and just kind of goes back into the ship. But it doesn't fully explain that because no Jedi should be able to do that, right? All fantasy you're always at risk of destroying the suspension of disbelief if you get too out of nowhere with fantasy, and that's an example of it. The way Leia goes back into the ship in episode 8. Anyway, broadly speaking, in episode 9 for the ending, I would have had Leia and Finn play a bigger role, assuming Finn was still alive. I like that Kylo ending. And again, I think any great ending for a dramatic series, even though Star Wars is drama action adventure, it's mostly action adventure. Like, it's one thing if it's a comedy, but if you're telling a story that has any amount of drama in it, I think it's usually most effective to have a bittersweet ending. Like, I think Tolkien did a fantastic job of that with, they saved the day, but Frodo can't be in the Shire anymore. It's just he's not there mentally, and he goes west with the elves, and it's like they say goodbye forever to Sam and Merry and Pippin. It's like, that's such a beautiful bittersweet ending.
Right.
And there's a lot of controversy over the final season of Game of Thrones, but I mostly liked that season. I think it was rushed, but it did a good job wrapping up the story, and it definitely has a very bittersweet ending. And so as far as bittersweet goes, I mean, think about how bittersweet you could make that ending to start episode 9. Like, in a sense, I think Kylo would make it bittersweet ending that way.
Yeah. But it could have been more,
Well, yeah, I guess also one thing I might have done is like having a victory. Of course, you're not going to have like the bad guy wins the end. There's going to be a general victory for like the common people, right? But like there could have been something taken away from, say, for example, Rey successfully kills Palpatine, but somehow through Palpatine's like leechiness, she's like no more force powers. And she's just like, or even, and one concept that's always fascinated me is the idea of memory and how much memory shapes a lot of your personality, just remembering who your wife is or who your brother is or whatever. Like, and imagine if like, boom, like Rhea kills Palpatine, but it like wipes her memory. And so she's just like a shell.
Yeah.
Imagine something like that. Might be a bit out there for Star Wars, maybe. That might be one of those things. If I wrote that, producers be like, "All right, Sam, you got to change that." And I'd be like, "Yeah, that's fair."
No, but
that'd be interesting.
I wouldn't go the amnesia route. I think that would be a little too much. I think it would leave you wondering, like, too much pity for Rey.
Yeah,
But
maybe
I
so.
love the idea. I love the idea that she loses her force powers
Hmm.
and she just goes back to a regular, normal person.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Interesting to think about.
because that's the other thing too with Rey is like again and again it's like I guess we see this with sequels all the time is like they have to always go bigger and better, right? And it's like Luke was made to be like the most powerful Jedi in the universe, and then we see Rey just like
Effortlessly
flying and being
Right,
able
right.
to, you know, it's just like she's just like she's Superman essentially, and she can do everything, and it's like she's just all powerful, and I don't know, it just kind of like at what point is there any more, you know, grounding for
Yeah.
the type of magic that the Force is.
And I'm not a comic book expert, but that's one reason I've never been that into Superman. Is like he has some good episodes, good villains, good story elements, but Superman always just felt, even as a kid, like as like a 8-year-old, like I was so much more interested in Batman. Because this is a dude that like has limitations. He's like just a smart person with great
Right.
inventions, and he's rich, which helps, of course. But you know, he's like this person who, like, with his own limits and resources, makes a lot of awesome, badass stuff happen. And Superman is just effortless. And you know, and again with Rey, I totally agree. It's like you don't feel this sense of her being grounded and of her being like, you know, really, really struggling with anything.
Yeah.
Or I mean, she struggles, but it's not like a real like this could undo me struggle, you know.
Without, I mean, it kind of makes you. I'll be honest. It makes me not like her as much, seeing how easily things come to her. I have more empathy and feel more with characters that really have to work hard to be able to do something. And since the first movie, The Force Awakens, it's like, wow, okay, she can already summon a lightsaber after 10 minutes of knowing she's Force sensitive, you know? And it's like,
Yeah.
it doesn't look like, they've not made it seem like she's had to work hard to achieve those abilities. And it kind of erodes my empathy for her. Like, it actually kind of makes me not like her as much. And so her losing her Force abilities would honestly make me like her all over again, because it's like now she's a real person just like everyone else, and she's got to learn to live without all these super abilities. And honestly, it makes her a little smaller, but it sets her on a new path of having to find her place in the world again.
And that also reminds me
It just makes it so much more compelling.
Yeah. That also reminds me of something that I mentioned in the previous episode. And, you know, in episode 8, there's this ending with those random kids who are like on the casino planet.
Yeah.
Right. And again, it might have kind of alluded to the fact that, like, oh, some common people who aren't necessarily Force sensitive might rise up and become big players in the story. Either that, or there's a bunch of people throughout the galaxy that are Force sensitive. Both of those are also routes I would have taken for the trilogy as a whole. It's like, one, you can have non-Force sensitive people who are like just the common folk rising up and doing big things. And two, and again, some of that wouldn't make a ton of sense to be like the ultimate solution to defeating the bad guys, because again, in a world of superhumans, the superhumans are going to win. They're not. They're going to defeat the common people. If you have like Force lightning, you're going to beat someone in a fight that's just fists, you know, hand to hand. But so that could have been a thing, but especially the concept of naturally, genetically, whatever else, there being millions of people throughout the galaxy that are Force sensitive. And so even if the Jedi Order has been destroyed, even if the Sith are this sort of like, you know, Illuminati behind closed doors puppet master organization, even if that's the case, think about all the in-between.
Right.
Think about the millions of, if not billions of, if it's a galaxy, trillions, quadrillions, you get the idea. Think about the crap ton of people that would be Force sensitive. It's like, whoa, the other day I was able to just close that door without touching it. And like those people could have easily come into play. And also another thing I would have done for this new trilogy is I would have had organizations outside the Sith and the Jedi that were Force oriented. based off of that very concept, right? Like there could be like an entire like illegal like pirate organization, and they're like pirate force users, and they don't have necessarily lightsabers, but they're like people who can use the force for all kinds of mischief.
Yeah.
And vice versa. There could be like vigilantes or like good guys who are like doing good things, like kind of Robin Hood type characters who are using their force powers, who aren't Jedis or Sith. But yeah, that's a whole other story element that I would have done if this trilogy is like had more.
And I do think that's explored in other stories. I think Rebels has some of those characters that are force sensitive but aren't like good or evil, and which I think is pretty compelling, because it's like, you know, we love having boxes for everything, and it's like, oh, I can't put this in a box. You know, what do I do with it?
Right.
I think overall, I just came away from this movie thinking nothing really changed. This trilogy didn't move the Star Wars saga forward in any significant way. It didn't cover any new groundbreaking territory.
Yeah.
It didn't leave any new lasting impressions on me. It just kind of felt like a weak reflection of the original trilogy.
Yes.
That wasn't able to live up to it, and which is really sad, because I really wanted to love this new trilogy.
Me too.
I really wanted to be excited about the fact that they were bringing the old cast back together, that they were making new Star Wars movies.
And now that Carrie Fisher's dead, it's like we had our chance.
That was the chance, and we totally blew it.
Well, they did, not us.
Yeah, we didn't.
We as in people in the 2010s and 2020s.
But I do think that there's an opportunity for Disney to move forward and to correct some wrongs. I do think there's still plenty of room for new stories. There's still plenty of material in the Star Wars universe to explore, entirely new sagas to start that have nothing to do with the Skywalker lineage and with you know the Empire and Darth Vader and all that. It's like, I think they have the opportunity now to go back in time. Like, let's go to the Old Republic, which I think, I've heard rumors, I think that is going to be the focus of new trilogies going forward, new sagas going forward, is they're actually going to explore that time period, which honestly I would have done with this new trilogy and not rehash this old, or I would have made a new villain, let it take place afterwards, but like, you know, explore something different, you know, and don't set it up to be the same conflict again. But
yeah,
I do think there's an opportunity for Disney to right some wrongs, to explore new territory. Let's bring in some new creative, visionary directors who take things in a new direction. Like, I'm all for that.
Yeah.
And I think they can do it. I think they will do it. I think that they realize now the mistakes that they made, and I just kind of feel sad that this trilogy is just like, going to have this image, and it's just going to kind of get retconned, I think, in the long run.
I saw a great meme. It was just like this picture of like Rey crying, and there's a bunch of like laughing characters from the prequel trilogy, like you know, poorly photoshopped around her. That's what we're supposed to do with a meme, and it's just like, when you're no longer the worst Star Wars trilogy.
Oh yeah. And it's all like prequel images.
Prequel people
like Jar Jar Binks and whatnot.
And that's another thing. This could be a whole other podcast in itself. In fact, it probably should be. I personally, even though I think the prequel trilogy is very underrated, and I think the original trilogy is it's pretty overrated. And I love the original trilogy. Don't get me wrong. It's classic for a reason. But I think people have heavy nostalgia goggles for the original trilogy, and they overlook some of the really strong elements of the prequel trilogy. And, you know, kind of like maybe with Rian Johnson, like the opposite of this Disney stuff is like, George Lucas was the king of his own universe. He wrote and directed all those movies. He was in charge of all the creative decisions, really, for the prequel and original trilogy. And it was a pretty good thing writing-wise for the original trilogy. It became a bit so-so in the prequel trilogy, because it's like, there wasn't a person to be like, George, that line is terrible. Yeah. Rewrite that crap. Like no one was there to do that.
Right.
But still, I think the world expansion, George Lucas nailed it. The having a different kind of story, George Lucas nailed it. Right? There's nothing Death Star related except for you get glimpses of them building it. That's it. It's a completely different kind of story.
Yeah,
And,
I mean, he explored
expanded
some,
Star Wars so
did.
effectively.
I mean,
And
I actually really enjoy Episode 2, The Attack of the Clones, because it kind of went into like a film noir detective storyline with Obi-Wan and the chase on Coruscant, and it's like they're running down these neon lit rainy corridors in Coruscant, and
it is kind of
and
noir.
he's Obi-Wan is having to go to different planets, and he's unraveling a mystery, and it's all, where is it going? And we kind of know where all this is ending, but we don't know how it's all going to come together. And I don't think it gets enough credit. Like, I don't think it gets the appreciation, because he took Star Wars in absolutely new territory.
Yeah. And even Episode 3 especially, and I could talk about Episode 3 all day long. It's my personal favorite of all the Star Wars movies, even though it does have some pretty terrible acting and some bad dialogue, or pretty terrible dialogue and some bad acting. But anyway, and that's one of my criticisms of the new trilogy is just that when you look at the action, right? Maybe it's just me being older. The last action movie that really kicked my ass was Mad Max Fury Road. I absolutely adore that movie.
Which I haven't seen yet.
Oh, yeah, soon. We should do that this week, maybe.
Yeah.
Anyway, so maybe it's just me being older, and maybe I'm biased here.
He's not old. I'm old.
Well, the action in this new trilogy didn't exactly blow me away either. Like, it wasn't bad by any means. It definitely wasn't bad. I mean, the CGI, the visual effects was top of the line, obviously.
Oh, production value.
Production values are terrific.
Oh.
That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is just like the writing of the action.
Yeah.
Like, I will say, even though it was a bit over the top, that part where Palpatine shoots lightning and it zaps like all the ships, like maybe some people probably think that was kind of dumb. I don't know how you feel about it, but I was just like, whoa, that's badass. Like,
Well, it was different and cool.
It was a bit overpowered, but.
I agree. I was very underwhelmed by the final climactic action scene.
And for me, that's like across the whole trilogy. It's just like the action, again, great production value, cinematography, the CGI, all that's great. But it's not that memorable. Like when you look at Episode 3, that movie opens that battle over Coruscant to save Palpatine, who we don't know is evil at the time, like the space fighting, and then them getting into the ship, fighting Grievous and Count Dooku, like all of that stuff would be like the most impressive action sequence in the new trilogy. But and that's just the opening of Episode 3.
Yeah.
Like the action, especially in the prequel trilogy, is so badass. And again, some people, especially people who are super into the original trilogy, would be hesitant to admit this, but a big chunk of Star Wars is just badass sci-fi action for the sake of badass sci-fi action. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. In fact, I think it's a very good thing when it's done right. But even that part of the new trilogy was just like, the action was cool.
Yeah.
There wasn't like a lightsaber fight or like a spaceship fight where I was just like on the edge of my seat. It was just like,
I mean, we should probably do a whole nother podcast just breaking down what makes good action scenes good, especially when it comes to Star Wars action scenes or sci-fi action scenes. And there's so much to get into there, but overall you kind of always want to feel like what's going on. Like good action scenes, you're able to follow the action, you're able to focus on one thing amidst the flurry of things happening. There's always the stakes are very clear. What's at stake if someone flies here or flies there, or they're being chased, or they have to fire this or whatnot. It's action scenes broken down are just stories within stories within stories. It's just like a little vignette. Even if it's 3 seconds, it's like there's a story here, there's a story here, there's a story here. And it's all following and building, and you're able to track and you follow along, and there's suspense and there's that. Rather than just now, what I felt was just visual mush.
Right.
which a lot of blockbuster movies are just visual mush.
Right. Yeah.
But with Rise of Skywalker, I was just like completely underwhelmed.
Right.
Mainly because they set it up to be the biggest space fight ever.
Yeah. With all those Star Destroyers.
I mean, there's 1,000 Star Destroyers, each equipped with a Death Star-like laser cannon.
Oh yeah, and that was ridiculous. That reminds me of Dr. Evil, like sharks with laser beams on their heads.
And
like,
then it's like Lando goes and, in the matter of like 10 minutes is able to assemble the largest fleet ever assembled in the history of any Star Wars movie. And so you have arguably the largest navies facing each other off, and the action is like...
Yeah, it could have
you
been
only see
unbelievable.
A couple of Star Destroyers taken down, and then it's Palpatine does his Force Lightning, and they're all kind of suspended in free fall for 3 seconds, and then it's like over. And you're like, what? Like, seriously, the hugest build-up to the biggest letdown ever.
Yeah.
In my mind. And I think it's because it's like they literally ran out of time is what I think happened. It's like,
yeah.
But it's like, well, this is the last movie. We have to, build it up to be the biggest battle.
It'll make a great Lego set.
Yes. But it's like, maybe that's where 2 movies would have been warranted because, you can't just set up the largest space battle in the history of Star Wars and then not dedicate at least a solid 20-30 minutes to seeing it play out and chase scenes and Star Destroyers taken down.
You got to Helm's Deep that thing.
I mean, you got to, strategize it out and have there be different phases to the battle and whatnot. I mean,
absolutely.
That's what I loved about Rogue One was its action is amazing.
It's great. Yeah, it's intense.
Because of how it was filmed, you're always tracking along. You're always following which characters are doing what, which spaceship is doing what are the stakes, what's the danger, who's chasing after them. You're never lost at any moment, even though there are 1,000 things going on. Mm-hmm. You're never lost. Like you're always tracking something. Rewatch it and you'll see what I mean, what I'm talking about. The level of planning is amazing in those action scenes.
Yeah.
And it all comes together and you don't even notice. That's the brilliant thing is you don't even notice it.
And one interesting storytelling element that like gives a solid, how should I phrase this? One really good storytelling element of Rogue One that makes that battle scene so effective is the fact that a lot of Rogue One is like this epic sci-fi heist movie, and like leading into that final battle,
Loved it. Yeah.
You don't know every detail, but kind of like more or less what their plan is.
Yeah.
And it's all about like seeing if that goes well and like, oh, that thing didn't work out. How are they going to fix that problem? And so like I think just having that like narrative information going into the battle, it makes the action that much more intense.
It really speaks to the fact how well it was done because even though we knew how Rogue One was going to end,
right?
I was still on the edge of my seat the entire time. Like
so good.
Those last 20, 30 minutes, I was on the edge of my seat the entire time because I'm like, are they going to make it out? Well, it's like, well, of course we know they'll make it. The plans will make it out, or we wouldn't have. We literally would not have the Star Wars saga, the original saga,
right?
If they didn't make it out. But it's how do they make it out and will they survive? These specific characters survive. I mean, it's hands down my favorite. That ending scene with Darth Vader coming out was just mind-blowing. And yeah, Rise of Skywalker, again, they built it up to be this epic space battle, and it was such a letdown.
When you think
get
about
like
it,
just a minute of action, you see a couple of ships taken down here or there.
Yeah. And I think that was also a very intentional executive decision too. And I have no doubt that part of it was probably for runtime. But one of the things that I learned in film school that has really stuck with me is my film professor, Berliner, the mad genius. He was telling us all about just the history of the major filmmaking studios and how they've merged and they dealt with each other, and how when you look at the rise of the blockbuster film in the 70s, like Jaws, The Godfather, believe it or not, was a blockbuster for its time. Exorcist, and of course eventually original Star Wars. One thing that stuck with me is that for blockbusters, a lot of the time the movie is a trailer for the brand itself. You know what I mean? And so Star Wars, of course, especially revolutionized merchandise and theme parks and all that
Yeah.
other stuff and like lunch boxes, whatever. And so, especially nowadays in 2019, 2020, I think those executives were like, let's show a crap ton of ships with powerful lasers on them. Let's show a massive fleet being assembled. And then we just kind of fast forward to the fight, show visual mush. As long as we show it, then we can sell a bunch of Lego sets and we can make it into like a theme park ride. And I have no doubt
Absolutely.
that they were like
no
checking
doubt.
those boxes.
No doubt. And that's what I said in the beginning.
But as a filmmaker, like if
was
Peter
it-
Jackson or
Yeah.
J.J. Abrams had free reign, they'd be like, if we're going to do that, that's a 30-minute battle scene.
Yeah.
But the execs were like, nah, just show it. Then that's all we need.
I mean, you just know that it's like the people pushing toys
Man.
are just like, okay, we need this new ship, but we just need to show it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Then the rest doesn't that matter that much. Yeah. Imagine, and that just popped an idea in my mind. Imagine Peter Jackson doing a Star Wars movie. I bet he could do
that
it.
would be really interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
he really flopped on The Hobbit, but again, I wonder if it's the same
Yeah.
issues there.
That was definitely corporate
meddling.
meddling. To some
Turning two
extent.
movies into three,
Yeah,
it's
and
just
also
a greedy for money thing.
Yeah. And even then, like, the Hobbit trilogy makes the new Star Wars trilogy look like... Well, okay, how should I phrase this? The new Hobbit... The Hobbit trilogy is way better than the new Star Wars trilogy, I think. Like,
Oh, I absolutely
leaps and
still
bounds
enjoyed.
better.
I still enjoyed, even though it didn't compare to
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings.
yeah.
I still really enjoy it.
Yeah. The third's the weakest, but the first two
Yeah.
are strong.
Yep.
They have some fluff, but... Yeah, no. Anyway, that's a whole other thing.
I think that's its main problem. It just has too much fluff. It didn't suffer from any story problems or
Yeah.
anything like that.
Tariel love triangle is a bit cheesy.
That
but
that is the only thing. The
Yeah.
the Legolas, Tariel, and the
Is it
love
Keely,
triangle
I think?
and Keely.
Yeah.
That you jog my memory. That is
That's the only
that's
story element
pretty
where I was like,
awful. Ugh.
and Pale Orc was a bit cheesy, but
And the Pale Orc.
he was a good antagonist for Thorin in the company.
Yeah, and at least they tried to come up with kind of a new antagonist and a new storyline. And anyways, that's a whole other podcast. Is
Yes.
The Hobbit.
Yes. Well, how about this? How about we just cut into some concluding remarks for episode 9 of the Star Wars trilogy?
Right. How do we want to end this?
Well, I'll start with mine. My closing statements, I guess, would just be that lots of corporate meddling, lots of Disney either not having enough faith in the creatives or maybe too much in the case of Rian Johnson. Like that might have undone episode 9 a lot. But ultimately, from the very beginning, there should have been a team of writers, even if it was just like 3 people, with a solidly conceived beginning, middle, and end. And that may have already happened anyway, but
Yeah.
I'll say
Doesn't
this.
feel like it. I highly doubt it.
Right. Well, what I'm saying is that may have happened, but Disney threw it out the window.
Yeah.
But like Disney should have agreed and committed to a really, really strong beginning, middle, and end writing for the trilogy that was different enough from the previous 6 movies. Like something pretty new, not completely alien, but pretty new that was really good, and they should have just committed to that. If they had done that, then at least these movies would have a legacy. They've made hundreds of millions, no, they've made billions of dollars. So the executives don't give a shit that they ruined this Star Wars trilogy, unfortunately. But if Disney had done that, they would have had probably the same profit, if not more of a profit, and they would have had a legacy for this trilogy. So that's what should have happened. That's what I think. Ultimately, Kylo had some great moments. I love the diversity of the cast. I'm all about like people of color and females being the lead Star Wars characters. I think it's great. It's just a shame that had to happen with the weakest writing of the entire saga, And ultimately, the action was great. Production values were great. It could have been way better if Disney had committed to an outline for all 3 movies and stuck with it.
I totally agree. Yeah, they it just kind of feels like they made this trilogy, as they went along. They had no clear preconceived notion of where they were going, and again, it felt like a story. It felt like a trilogy it's always hard to create something that has such a strong legacy. And, I don't envy their task, of like having to fill George Lucas's shoes, of having to, create something that has to be as good as the original. Like, that's a daunting task. But in the end, I think they got it all wrong because their focus was on checking boxes rather than, this
rather
this
than
is
authenticity.
rather than authenticity.
Yeah.
And our podcast is about writing and storytelling, and one of the maxims that I will always remember that my theater professor taught us was, before tackling any play or directing any new play or any new story, you always have to ask yourself, why does this story need to be told?
Mm-hmm.
Does the story need to be told? And I think if the writers of the new Star Wars trilogy started out with that, rather than, well, it's money, well, it's more merchandise, well, it's Star Wars, so how can we not? But why does this story need to be told specifically? And then craft a story that's actually compelling and stands on its own, and we can walk away with and say, yeah, that story needed to be told.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that was worth telling. Those characters were worth seeing. I don't feel like I saw that.
Yeah.
I feel like I saw
Right.
a trilogy that checked a bunch of boxes into what it thought made a Star Wars movie, rather than trying to tell a story that the world needed. That sounds super deep, but in the end,
totally agree.
I think that's where Disney got it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And my hope is for the future that they would tackle new stories with that same thought, and really sit down and try and construct something with really compelling characters, and a compelling reason to tell the story.
Absolutely. And with that, I guess that concludes this episode. Stay tuned for the next one. We'll have to come up with a topic.
Yeah.
I'm thinking the next one will probably not be Star Wars. It'd be kind of nice to hop into different branch, or it could be Star Wars. I could talk about it all day long.
We definitely have other movies to talk about. We have some book reviews
Right.
that we definitely want to get to. So stay tuned, because there's going to be a lot more coming.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening.